I am thrilled to be here. Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about culture, which is something that I'm very passionate about and is very close to my heart, and which I've actually been working with for the last 20 years. And we're going to talk about culture in the context of how to make it a strategy for growth. So I'm going to talk about why this is really good for your business, to make your culture a strategy for growth. I'm going to talk about three mistakes that managers often make when they are trying to change culture. And then finally, I'm going to talk and share with you a model, actually a roadmap, so to speak, that can help you practically and strategically work with your culture. But before we go there, let's have a little look on what is happening in the world right now. We're going to take a 10,000-foot perspective for a second. And the last 10 to 15 years, we have seen how the world has become more and more global, digitized. There's huge demographic changes going on. And, well, the last 18 months, I think we all can aware there has been some pretty big changes in the world as well. We have had a global pandemic. So with that, I think we all can agree that shift happens, change happens, and we got to deal with it. And the work world needs to deal with it, and companies need to deal with it. So we'll look at some of the trends that we see happening in this new world of work. And this has been going on for quite some time, but it has accelerated during the pandemic. One is how organizations are organized. Well, we have like typical hierarchical organizations are more and more moving towards what we call a team of teams. So you have more autonomous teams because they can move faster, they're closer to the customer, and can make faster decisions. You also see a big shift in how leaders lead. So the old-fashioned way, which we call command and control, where the boss was on the top and had all the answers and the rest should just follow. Well, that doesn't really work anymore in this new world of work. Leadership is so much more about engaging and empowering people. Then we also see that there has become a new awareness around the human side of business. Where we used to talk about people at work as like human resources, we now talk about this as human beings. And that is a big mindset shift as well. And then, of course, something that I think most business leaders out there are a little bit pulling their hair about, and that is, how are we going to deal with this new hybrid work situation? So going from mostly in office to remote and now slowly getting into the hybrid. What does that look like? And how does that impact the way we work? And that is also why the fifth trend we're seeing is culture, because the four others are actually making culture even more relevant to talk about, because how does this influence culture? So let's take a little second just to talk about how I define culture here. So it's basically how you work together. It's how you collaborate, how you communicate, innovate, solve problems, and how you treat each other. And not to forget, treat your customers as well. So basically, culture, it determines how things get done. But when we talk about culture as a strategy, we talk about consciously and deliberately building the kind of culture and strengthen the kind of culture that you need in order to secure your business success. So we can basically say there are two ways that you can approach your culture. So one is to do it consciously. And that is to say, okay, so where are we heading? What's our vision? What's our purpose? What's our goal? What kind of culture do we need to build in order to reach that goal? And we have the other way, which is unconsciously. And that's basically doing nothing and kind of just letting it evolve and develop by chance. And strangely enough, that is the approach that most companies have been taking up to now. And I'm afraid this you can see this in what I call some brutal facts. What is the current situation in the work world right now? Well, let's have a little look at culture. So this is from PwC's Global Culture Survey in 2021. They asked the executives, so do you prioritize culture? Do you think culture is important? Yes, said 67% of the executives. We prioritize culture. But you know what? Only 46% of the employees agreed with that. Then we said, do you have a great culture? 67% of the executives said, yes, we do. But only 41% of the employees agreed. Then when it comes to engagement, year after year after year, Gallup has asked people how they feel about their jobs. And year after year, it turns out people don't feel that great about their jobs. And it hasn't really changed that much. So approximately 80% of the global work population say they are not engaged in their jobs. And then, you remember what Espen talked about, the war of talent? Well, it's real. 40% of the workforce actually say they consider leaving their employer this year. And the reason they want to leave is they are discontent with leadership, culture, and the employee experience. The fact that 80% of the global workforce are disengaged and knowing the business benefits, which I will come back to in a little while, for having engaged teams, Gallup has estimated that the global disengagement costs companies around the world $7 trillion. And then finally, on the brutal facts, talk about Mind the Gap. In a recent survey of millennials and Gen Zs from Deloitte, they say what they want is purposeful jobs, work-life balance, flexible work practices, emotional and mental well-being. But most say they don't experience that today. And you know what? In 2025, millennials and Gen Zs, which basically are people born after 1981, they will make up 75% of the workforce. So, yes, we need to pay attention. But not only because of that, but also because of the immense business benefits of actually working strategically with your culture. And when I say working strategically with your culture, I talk about creating the right kind of culture that actually inspires people to give their very best and that will lead to high performance. So when you're able to do that and work strategically with it and create these highly engaged organizations, these are some of the benefits you can expect. 50% improvement in employee retention, because people don't want to leave when they enjoy their jobs, right? 20% higher customer satisfaction, 18% better business performance, and 23% higher profitability, according to Gallup. And actually, there's so many benefits, I couldn't put it all in one slide, so I got one more slide for you, and that is 3 times higher shareholder revenue, shareholder return, sorry. They are also 5 times more likely to change. And if we know something we all need to be able to and adapt to and embrace these days, it is change. There are 73% less burnout among people who's in cultures that are engaged and happy where they work. And you know what? People are also 29% happier with their lives. This is according to Center for Neuroeconomic Studies. So there's all these benefits and reasons why you would want to make culture a strategy for growth. So why don't more people do it? You know what? I have a theory. Because most people haven't really learned, 1, why it's so important, and 2, how to do it. And actually, we might even have learned things that isn't really beneficial and doesn't really create these kind of high-performing cultures. So Yoda said wisely, you must unlearn what you have learned. And there's one thing I needed to unlearn. So I don't know about you guys, but when I studied psychology and change management at Stockholm University in mid-90s, we learned about something called the burning platform. The burning platform, that was something that people said, if you want to create change, you got to scare people because, if you don't change, you got to lose your job or we're going to fail or the company is going to go bankrupt. That was like how they thought this is the best way to motivate for change. But neuroscience and management the studies show that when people get scared, they don't change. They actually have this natural reaction, freeze or flee or fight. So actually, instead of scaring people to change, we have to inspire them for change. And the best way to inspire people for change is to explain why. Why do we need to change? So that is number 1, that a lot of leaders actually think that scaring people is a good way to change the culture. If we don't do that, then this will happen. But instead, create a story, create a narrative, create something inspiring, and explain why is this culture change so important for us and want people to be part of it. The other one is a lot of leaders tend to talk to people and not with people. So there's a lot of great strategies. So how do you go out and talk about this and this and that? And you can have all hands meetings and you can have emails and all that. But it turns out if people are just talked to and not talked with, it's very hard for them to engage in the changes that's needed. So that is why engagement is actually, or engage is a verb. So if you want to engage people, have engaged people, you need to engage with them. So that is number 2, that we see leaders when they start talking with people and listening to people, people will also be much more inclined to be part of the change. And finally, the very classical and maybe the most normal one. Any of you guys out there try this with your kids to say like, well, do as I say, not as I do. Well, that doesn't really work, does it? Well, it doesn't work when you want to change culture either. So if you're a leader and you want to change your organization and think others are going to change, but you're not willing to change, well, it simply won't work. So you always have to start with yourself and see, what can I do differently? How can I change? Because as a leader, you're a role model and people will follow your lead. So these are the 3 very normal mistakes that if we're aware of them, we can actually be much more effective in driving culture change. Okay, so let's go a little bit like, how do you actually then strategically and consciously create culture? So this is one simple model, which I think many people tend to forget, to see how crucial it is to understand that what we value, what we deem important, it shapes the way we think. And the way we think, that shapes what we do. And what we do becomes the culture. So being clear about what you value, and a lot of companies have values, but make sure they are real, not just on the poster on the wall, but something people truly understand and believe in, because it will shape the way they work. So this is one kind of simple way to start being a bit more aware and conscious about the culture. But now I'm going to show you something that is a bit more comprehensive, but also a lot more effective. Because what you want to do, you don't want to create any culture. You want to create the right kind of culture, the kind of culture that secures your business success, right? So this is a model. I call it the corporate spring model. I have been working with this for many years, and my team and I have been working with hundreds of teams around the world, guiding them through that and coaching them through this model and using it as a tool to discuss the things that really drive performance the most. So if you look at it and you think about Maslow's hierarchies of needs, kind of, we have at the bottom, you have the basics, the physiological needs, and then on the top, you have self-actualization. Well, here, the basics is like you need to have a purpose. Everyone needs to know, why do you come to work in the morning? What are we here to do? The other is to have a strong sense of identity, a sense of belonging. I belong here. I'm part of this group. And the third one is to have trust and psychological safety. So when you have these, then you can build on and go talk about mindsets and people understanding they can choose their mindset. And the ultimate is passion and joy. So when you get to that place, that's where people really look forward to come to work in the morning and enjoy what they do. That is when you achieve what we call the high-performing team status. That's where you are able to get there. And this is not something I just came up with because I think it's a really good idea. This is actually based on science, neuroscience, social psychology, behavioral economics. And we have been working with startup companies with it and huge, Fortune 500 companies. And what's amazing about this model is that it works everywhere because it's about humans. It's about human needs and how do we, how are we motivated and how do we best work together in order to be able to do what we're here to do. But of course, this doesn't happen just in a vacuum. So if you see around this model, we have leadership. So leaders, how they show up, their role models, how they lead, but also self-leadership is extremely important in this. And then you have the way you collaborate. How do you work together as a team and support each other around each and one of these building blocks? And then how do you communicate? So basically this model, it is everything influences everything. So if you kind of start working on one of them, the others might be influenced, right? So having all of these in mind at the same time, it is one way, but the other one is also to hone in on certain ones that you think is going to be most crucial for you right now. And I also want to share one more model, which I think a lot of companies forget when they talk about culture, because sometimes I hear people talk about culture as this feel-good thing. And of course, that might be part of it, or it is part of it, because if you feel passionate and joyful and there's trust, of course, that will feel good, right? But it's more than that. It's so much more than that, because it is a way of working together. But in order to make that sustainable, it also has to be strengthened and reinforced by the structure. So, for example, if you want to have an empowered culture and saying, people, we trust you, we want you to be able to make decisions, you can't have a lot of rigid control mechanisms that hold people back and doesn't make it possible to make decisions or take action, if you understand. So I just want to share that this is also an important thing to do. And it can look a little bit overwhelming, and this is something you can just use as a guide to work with over time, but it is extremely helpful because it gives you a roadmap to work with it strategically and structurally. And over time, you will see how this can impact the way people feel and the way they work together. So now I just quickly go through each and one of these building blocks. And what I would like you to do now is to think, okay, when you think about these three drivers, for each and one of these building blocks, what does this mean for my leadership role? What can I do more of or less of? How can we collaborate to make this happen and be part of our culture? And how do we need to communicate that? So for each one, please just have that in mind as I go through each and one of them. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about purpose. So purpose, that is such a fundamental thing when we talk about creating high-performing cultures. Because if people feel that what they do matters, that it's important, they will give their best. So basically, you can say purpose is your reason for existing, but it's also something that people say, this is why I get up in the morning. And it turns out that people are extremely intrinsically motivated, meaning meaningful work makes a huge difference in how people feel. And the chances that they will perform better is overwhelming when you look at the research. Identity is another of the building blocks, which is also very important to have consciously talk about and think about, what are our values? What do we believe in? What do we have in common? To create this sense of belonging. Belonging turns out to be one very strong human need that we have. And it's all the way back on the savannah when we were part of a tribe. And if we weren't part of a tribe, that was actually, it was dangerous. We could die. Well, our bodies, they can still kind of react almost similarly and get really scared and afraid if they don't feel like we belong somewhere. So feeling of belonging is so important. And that is how you include people. How do you treat people? It is about the social life, the camaraderie, to being kind and friendly. And so people say, I belong with these people. So that is another fundamental human need that really impacts the way people perform. The third one is trust. I don't know if you ever tried this trust fall, not to recommend it actually, but it illustrates well the fact that someone has my back, that feeling of, you know what, I am psychologically safe here. I can be myself at work. People are kind and supportive. Kindness is underestimated as an ingredient in the work life, because if people feel safe and that people are kind to each other, they can focus on doing a great job. They don't have to be afraid and look over their shoulder and be nervous to make mistakes, but actually innovate and create. So having a conscious approach to that as well, and talk about what is it, what creates trust, what creates distrust, how can we as a team together create this kind of environment? So basically, all these building blocks are things you can get together as a team and talk about and have conversations around and agree how would you and we like to do it here in our team, in our company, in our organization. So let's go up one more on the model that I shared with you, the corporate spring model, and talk a little bit about what we call growth mindset. So this is a kind of a big building block because it talks about the fact that we as human beings actually have this amazing strength that we can choose our mindset. But very many people don't really think about that, or maybe not even aware of it. And just being aware that you have these abilities You have the ability to change. What does that look like? How does it feel? How do you help yourself and help your team to handle changes? You have the ability to respond. If something happens to you, from the moment it happens to your respond, you have a little window of 2 seconds where you actually deliberately can make a choice. Do I now want to point finger and say this is stupid, or do I want to point fingers at myself and say, what can I do about it? Just knowing this, understanding this is a huge strength, individually and collectively. And then we have what you talk about, growth ability. And that is like our ability to learn new things and try new things and be the best version of ourselves. But this is also something we need to deliberately want to do. So neuroscience actually shows that our brains are really, really lazy. So our brains, they like to not have a lot of challenges because it's designed to keep us safe and keep us, where we are. So anything that is a big change or a reaction or a growth opportunity, we need to actively pursue it. So this is interesting when you look at the psychologists of teams, that sometimes we think that people are negative, and sometimes we can just say their brains are a bit lazy because you're not making an effort to look for a solution. So that's a little language for you, but it's a whole philosophy and a way of working that is really powerful when you start embracing that. And there's the saying, change your thoughts and you change your world, and that is so true. Then we come to the top of this model, the pyramid, and that is passion. And passion, that is, that's what creates amazing things. And nothing of all these examples here would have happened without passion. Because passion, that fuels us, it gives us energy, it makes us do that extra that we didn't even think we could do. But you know what? Passion can be a two-edged sword, because if it's only passion, it can only almost be like blindly passion. You need to actually combine passion with joy. Because when you have joy and passion, that is when the magic happens. That is when you, as a team, as people, I start shining because you're having fun and you're doing what you love doing. And the combination of that is truly what makes up that very unique, highly engaged cultures that I explained earlier. Only 20% of the global population say they are at that stage today. But now when you know how you can work with this model, you and your organization can actually be one of those. And maybe we can get that number up a bit. So next year when Gallup does it, it's not 20% anymore. It's hopefully, or 80% disengaged. Maybe it's 50. Who knows? Anyway, I'm going to round it up a little but let me share with you the happiness researcher from Harvard, Sean Aker. He has written a book which is called The Happiness Advantage. And basically what he's saying is conventional wisdom has it all wrong. Because we go around and think that, if I only get that, then I'm going to be happy. If I only achieve this, I'm going to be happy. But research shows that actually it's the other way around. Happiness leads to success, not the other way around. So my last slide here is just like reminding you again of this model. And hopefully you now have some ideas of how you can start working with it as well. And I also want to just remind you of some of the benefits if you do. You get better business performance, higher profitability, higher shareholder return. And as Espen talked about earlier as well, that war of talent is real. And you will attract top talents because these are the kind of organizations people want to work for. And it might sound like a cliche, but it's not, because happy people is good for business. So thank you, everyone.